D. If you've ever felt the world pulling you in different directions, if you've ever questioned your purpose or wondered how one voice can change everything, then this story will shake you to your core. Hit that like button right now, because what you're about to discover about Bob Marley isn't just music history. It's a blueprint for transformation that the world desperately needs today. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this journey through the prophet's life will challenge everything you think you know about power, spirituality, and revolution. And when you hear what Bob predicted about our world today, drop your thoughts in the comments. I promise you'll never see his music the same way again. The humid air of 9 Mile hung thick with possibility on February 6, 1945, when Norval Sinclair Marley's son took his first breath. But this wasn't just any birth. This was the arrival of a soul that would bridge two worlds, carrying the weight of ancestry and the promise of prophecy. Cedella Malcolm held her newborn close, unaware that she cradled not just her child, but the future voice of the oppressed, the melody of the marginalized, the rhythm of revolution itself. The mixed-race boy who would become Robert Nesta Marley entered a world already fractured by colonial wounds, where his very existence challenged the social order of 1940s Jamaica. His white father, absent and ashamed, represented the colonial power structure that would forever shape Bob's understanding of inequality. His black mother, strong and spiritual, embodied the resilience that would become his greatest weapon. In that small rural village, surrounded by the blue mountains that seemed to touch heaven itself, the foundations of a legend were quietly being laid. The poverty was crushing, the isolation complete, yet something extraordinary was stirring in that red dirt and those endless skies. Trenchtown wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a crucible where dreams either died or transformed into something immortal. When 12-year-old Bob arrived in Kingston's notorious ghetto, he carried with him the rural spirituality of 9 Mile and an acoustic guitar that would soon become his lifeline. The zinc fences and concrete yards of government housing couldn't contain the musical revolution brewing in those cramped spaces. Here, among the sufferers and the survivors, Bob discovered that music wasn't entertainment. It was survival, resistance, prayer, all rolled into one. The Wailers formed not as a band, but as a brotherhood forged in the fires of struggle. Peter Tosh, with his militant edge, and Bunny Wailer, with his mystical depth, created the perfect triangle of creative tension with Bob's prophetic vision. They weren't just making music, they were channeling the collective pain and hope of an entire generation trapped between colonialism's end and independence's unfulfilled promises. The harmonies they created in those early sessions at Studio One weren't just notes. They were the sound of souls refusing to be silenced, the rhythm of hearts that refused to surrender to circumstance. Studio One in 1963 was more than a recording studio. It was the epicenter of a cultural earthquake that would reshape how the world heard Caribbean music. When the teenage Wailers walked through those doors, they carried with them the raw energy of Trenchtown and dreams bigger than their circumstances. Clement Coxone Dodd saw something in these young lions that others missed. Not just talent, but a hunger that could transform genres. The ska rhythms that dominated Jamaican music then were about to be revolutionized by 3 boys who understood that music could be both celebration and protest, both party and prayer. Simmer Down wasn't just their first hit. It was a manifesto disguised as melody, telling the rude boys of Kingston to channel their anger into something constructive rather than destructive. Bob's voice, still rough around the edges but already carrying that unmistakable spiritual weight, began to emerge as something special. While his bandmates brought technical skill and street credibility, Bob brought vision, the ability to see beyond the immediate struggle to something larger, something cosmic. Those early recordings captured lightning in a bottle, the sound of young men discovering their power while still learning to wield it responsibly. The late 1960s brought changes that would reshape not just the Wailers' sound, but their souls. Rastafarianism wasn't just a religion Bob adopted. It was a revelation that explained everything he'd felt, but couldn't articulate about injustice, spirituality, and his place in the world. When he began growing his dreadlocks and studying the teachings of Marcus Garvey and Haile Selassie, skeptics saw it as another phase, another pose. They couldn't have been more wrong. This spiritual awakening coincided with the musical evolution from ska to the slower, more meditative rocksteady, and finally to the hypnotic, trance-inducing rhythms of reggae. The bass lines grew deeper, the drums more primal, the messages more urgent. Bob wasn't just singing anymore, he was channeling ancient wisdom through modern struggles, connecting the pain of slavery to the hope of redemption, the reality of oppression to the promise of liberation. The transformation was so complete that when you listened to Soul Rebel or Duppy Conqueror, you weren't just hearing songs, you were witnessing the birth of a prophet who happened to express his visions through 12-bar structures and 3-chord progressions. Island Records changed everything, though not in ways anyone expected. When Chris Blackwell signed Bob Marley and the Wailers in 1972, he saw commercial potential in what he called rebel music. What he got was something far more dangerous and beautiful, an artist who refused to be contained by marketing categories or cultural expectations. Catch a Fire and Burnin' weren't just albums. They were declarations of independence from both the music industry's limitations and society's attempts to silence revolutionary voices. The rock-influenced production attracted international attention, but it was Bob's uncompromising message that captivated souls worldwide. While Peter and Bunny grew uncomfortable with the commercial direction and eventually left to pursue solo careers, Bob pressed forward with a clarity of purpose that bordered on the supernatural. He understood something his former bandmates didn't, that compromise in presentation didn't have to mean compromise in message, that reaching more people meant saving more souls. The addition of the I3s, Rita Marley, Marsha Griffiths and Judy Mowat, brought a feminine energy that softened the edges without dulling the impact, creating harmonies that sounded like ancestral spirits blessing the mission. December 3rd, 1976 should have been just another night, another concert, another step in Bob's rising career. Instead, it became the night that proved music truly was stronger than bullets, that some missions are too important to be stopped by violence. The assassination attempt at Hope Road wasn't random. It was a desperate act by forces who recognized that Bob's influence had grown beyond entertainment into something politically threatening. 7 men with guns thought they could silence a message that was resonating across racial, cultural, and economic lines. They shot Bob, Rita, and manager Don Taylor, believing that violence could kill an idea whose time had come. 2 days later, Bob took the stage at the Smile Jamaica concert, his arm in a sling, his voice stronger than ever, and asked the question that defined his entire philosophy. The people who are trying to make this world worse aren't taking a day off. How can I? That performance, lasting just 16 minutes, contained more courage and conviction than most artists display in entire careers. It wasn't just a concert. It was a resurrection, a declaration that some lights burn too bright to be extinguished by darkness. Exodus wasn't just an album title. It was a prophecy, a roadmap, and a revolution all pressed into vinyl grooves. Recorded in London during self-imposed exile after the assassination attempt, these songs emerged from a place of deep reflection and spiritual evolution. Bob wasn't running from Jamaica. He was creating space to process the weight of his calling and the cost of his convictions. One Love, 3 Little Birds, Jamming. These weren't just songs, but anthems that would outlive their creator. Messages in bottles thrown into the ocean of human consciousness. The album spent 56 consecutive weeks on the UK charts, but numbers couldn't capture its true impact. This was music that transcended genre, geography, and generation, speaking directly to something universal in the human experience. The longing for unity, the need for hope, the belief that change was possible. Bob had evolved from entertainer to educator, from musician to messenger, from performer to prophet. The dreadlocked Rastaman from Jamaica was being recognized as a global voice for peace, justice, and spiritual awakening. Yet with recognition came responsibility that weighed heavier than any crown. The One Love Peace concert on April 22, 1978, represented the pinnacle of Bob's belief that music could heal even the deepest wounds. Jamaica was tearing itself apart with political violence, the JLP and PNP turning the island into a battleground where ordinary citizens paid the price for political ambitions. When Bob agreed to perform at this concert, he wasn't just agreeing to sing, he was volunteering to step into the line of fire between two armies and declare peace. The moment he brought opposing political leaders Michael Manley and Edward Seeger together on stage, joining their hands above his head while singing One Love, he created an image that would define his legacy forever. Here was a musician wielding more moral authority than presidents, a Rastaman commanding more respect than generals, a prophet proving that some truths are more powerful than politics. The gesture lasted only seconds, but its impact rippled across decades. Bob had demonstrated something the world desperately needed to see, that reconciliation was possible, that enemies could become brothers, that music really could be the healing of the nation. By 1980, the cancer growing in Bob's toe had become something darker, more aggressive, spreading through his body like a shadow consuming light. Yet even as his physical form weakened, his spiritual power seemed to intensify. His final tour, supporting the Uprising album, became a pilgrimage, each concert a gathering of souls seeking something deeper than entertainment. Redemption Song, stripped of all musical accompaniment except his acoustic guitar, revealed the essence of everything he'd been trying to say for decades. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. This wasn't just a song, it was a final lesson, a last gift to a world still struggling with invisible chains. The boy from 9 Mile, who had grown into a global prophet, was preparing to transition, not in defeat, but in triumph, knowing that the seeds he'd planted would continue growing long after the gardener was gone. On May 11, 1981, Robert Nesta Marley spoke his final words. Money can't buy life. It was the ultimate summation of a philosophy that had always placed spiritual wealth above material gain, eternal truth above temporary comfort. But death couldn't silence what had already been born into the world. The understanding that music is medicine, that unity is possible, and that every small voice has the power to become thunder. Today, more than 4 decades after Bob's transition, his prophecies are manifesting with stunning accuracy. He sang about one love, one heart, at a time when the world seemed irreversibly divided. Yet now we see global movements for unity emerging from the most unexpected places. He warned about mental slavery when physical chains had been broken, but psychological ones remained intact. And today, millions are awakening to the invisible systems that still control minds and hearts. He predicted that small island developing states would need to get up, stand up for their rights. And now we witness climate activism being led by voices from the Caribbean and Pacific nations he championed. The reggae rhythms he pioneered have become the soundtrack for resistance movements from Nigeria to Brazil, from London to Tokyo. His message of spiritual over material wealth resonates more powerfully now than ever, as humanity grapples with the emptiness of pure capitalism and the environmental cost of endless consumption. Bob Marley didn't just predict global change, he planted the seeds that are growing into the solutions our world desperately needs. In the comments below, tell me which Bob Marley prophecy you think is most relevant to our world today. Are we witnessing the redemption song he sang about, or are we still caught in the mental slavery he warned against? Share your thoughts using Dujal Bob Marley prophecy or redemption song. Let's continue this conversation and see how his vision is still shaping our reality.